Thank you, Sean. We appreciate all your hard work and the work that you do for the city. Just on a side note, I think anytime that we know that our community works together to do these simple acts of kindness makes us a better community. And it's those small gestures that I think goes to show you what kind of town Casper is, the kind of employees that we have here at Casper, for the city of Casper. So with a grateful heart, thank you so very much for representing us and the people of Casper. Now is the time we invite anyone in the audience who wishes to speak with the council to come forward. As stated on the first page, please remember to state your name and your address. Direct your questions towards me. Please no personal attacks on the staff or the council. Council will not respond to any personnel matters. Those will all be referred to our city manager. And questions posed by speakers may or may not be answered. And please limit your question or your presentations to 5 minutes.
You knew I'd come up here.
I knew it.
Dale Zimmerly, 3035 Bel Air Drive. I want to thank all of you for your service for this year. That's why we got you a little gift, and just because this is Christmas season, where we celebrate the gift from God, which is Jesus Christ. I haven't been here since the comment session's been at the beginning. I've been busy and I've missed you guys, and so I think now we need to start with prayer. Lord, we just thank you for the opportunity we have to come to you directly and to honor you and to speak with you. Thank you for this city council, and thank you for placing each person where they are, Lord. You are in control of all of that, and we just love you, and thank you for the ultimate gift of all, your son, Jesus. In his name I pray, amen. Maybe with the new city council, we can actually start the meetings with prayer, as Congress does in Washington, D.C., and down in Cheyenne when they meet. They open all their meetings with prayer. That's a very important thing. Dallas messed something too about the unconstitutional ordinance that the city council has about firearms. That needs to be dealt with. Maybe the new city council can do that. Also, the bill about the animals in town. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it doesn't say anything about making cats have a license or a leash. I hate it when cats come into my yard and dig up the flowers. I guess if the city doesn't put anything in there, I guess the state feral cat law comes into effect, right? We all know what that is, don't we? Take care of the cat if it's on your property. You guys have been doing a good job, though. I catch you on YouTube all the time and watch it and agree with some of the things you do, not all the things. Jesse, it's going to be sad to see you go. I see you're growing your hair back like I am. I was trimming it. Looks good on you, young man. And Miss Humphrey and Dallas, thank you for your service on the committee. And we're going to miss both of you, and well, all three of you. And just thank all of you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I had a comment.
Oh, yes, go right ahead.
I agree with you about the prayer. I've asked that the council appoint a chaplain, so I hope the new council members can give that some thought. I think it's an important issue to bring God into this place. I don't think it hurts one thing. And I think we can do it. Like you say, the Congress of the United States does it. One of the best prayers I ever saw was the prayer that preacher did in the president's office that they brought back from Turkey. And there's a lot of power in those things. So thank you very much, Dale.
Thank you, Dale, for the gifts. We appreciate that. You guys, if we don't see you, have a wonderful holiday and Christmas, okay?
Thank you.
Any others?
Where's Dennis?
I know.
Taking that off?
Exactly. Please read the consent agenda titles.
Establishing December 18th, 2018 as a public hearing date. for consideration of the following two items: the vacation and replat of Betty Luker Parkway Campus Number 2 and a portion of Elkhorn Valley Number 5, Lot 1, to create Elkhorn Village Addition comprising 21 acres more or less, in consideration of a request for rezoning of the proposed Elkhorn Village Addition from PUD Planned Unit Development, AG Urban Agriculture, and R2 1-unit residential to entirely R2 1-unit residential. Said property is generally located northeast of the intersection of Newport and East 12th Streets. Authorization of submission of a Wyoming Business Council grant for the First Street reach of the North Platte River Restoration Poplar Street Bridge to Burlington Northern Santa Fe Bridge Project, and establishing February 19th, 2019 as a public hearing date for consideration of the annual renewal of liquor licenses.
Thank you. Chair to entertain a motion to, by minute action, establish the public hearing dates just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Vice Mayor Powell. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the ordinance permitting distillery satellite tasting rooms. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we do. We have one exhibit. Exhibit number 1 is correspondence from John Henley to J. Carter Napier dated November 19, 2018.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As we recently learned, we found out that a distillery can open a tasting room within the borders of our community, even if that particular license holder does not reside or do business within the borders of our community. However, our ordinances do not currently accommodate that type of request or interest or whatever. And so we bring this change forward to you to consider that would allow these kinds of businesses to occur within the borders of our community and make that happen. So with your approval, after 3 readings, of course, we then will be able to have this type of business be available in Casper.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes, and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. At this time, I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the tasting rooms to please approach the lectern. Those in favor of the issues of involving the tasting rooms. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello, Mayor, Council. We are speaking in favor. My name is Chad Pollock. I am currently living at 1244 South Walcott.
Bill Pollock, 1244 South Walcott.
We are just kind of coming up to speak about it. It's one of those things that we've been looking at for a little while now. We operate in mills. One of the things that is a struggle for distilleries is finding central locations that can also facilitate the scale and scope of the operation. So we're looking to separate our manufacturing facility from our tasting room so that we can have it in a bit more foot traffic area and hopefully contribute to some downtown development stuff.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Councilman Hopkins.
Just a question for our attorney. Just so we're clear on this, if they open a place downtown, they cannot cater from that. This is not a catering license. It's only one place where they can sell the product that they make. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councilman. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Councilman Hubert.
So as I understand this, it's in essence, people that would come in there are limited to nothing more than 2 drinks.
They're allowed to have 2, it's actually 3 ounces of free samples. There's no limit on drinks per state statute.
Oh, okay. So if they can convince you to give them a free sample, they get 2 free samples, but then beyond that, people.
So they can purchase the alcohol for on-site or off-site consumption, but we can't give it to them beyond 2, I believe it's 2 1.5 ounce samples. Yeah. So I couldn't just give them a bunch of free.
I was a little bit confused when I read that.
So there's no limit on what we can sell them, it's just what we can give them.
But you'll be able to sell your product.
Sell bottles and cocktails is how the state has it.
Right. I don't think any other questions. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Any others who wish to speak in favor? At this time, I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the issues involving the tasting rooms to please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in opposition. There being no others to speak for or against the issues involving the tasting rooms, I now declare the public hearing closed. Please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance amending Chapter 5.08 of the Casper Municipal Code to permit distillery satellite tasting rooms.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Laird, seconded by Vice Mayor Powell. Discussion. Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to quickly say that I'm glad that we're updating our city ordinances that fall in line with what the changes that were made at the state level and state statute. And, you know, here's just another example of what happens when we kind of reduce some of those restrictions, new businesses coming in our community.
Any other discussion? Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only thing that concerns me, I don't have any problems with this, but the only thing that concerns me is we've got a local distillery that's going to open up a place downtown to sell their products. And I just wonder if they've kind of thought this through on what happens to the rest of their products that they're selling at the retailers. Those guys are probably going to see this as competition. Now, that's their problem, but I just kind of wonder that, you know, if they thought of that, so.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I guess I'd just like to point out we did something similar with the satellite winery permit, and we have a satellite winery location, and we've had no difficulties with that. So to me, this makes sense to line our ordinances up with state statute as we did with the winery.
Councilman Laird.
I think it's a very progressive ordinance. It'll obviously bring more sales tax to the city, which we dearly need, and I'm going to vote for it.
Okay. Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Nope. Did we already do that? Oh my gosh. Please cast your vote. God. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
I get so enthralled in the conversation, I lose my spot.
Are you having an off night?
I am having an off night tonight. I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the transfer of location of retail liquor license number 5. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Yes, Your Honor, we have 5 exhibits. Exhibit number 1, correspondence from Fleur Trummel to J. Carter Napier dated November 14, 2018. Exhibit number 2, affidavit of publication is published in the Casper Star Tribune dated November 27, 2018. Exhibit number 3, affidavit of website publication is published on the City of Casper website dated November 13, 2018. Exhibit number 4, affidavit of notice of conspicuous posting pursuant to Wyoming Statute 12-4-104A as posted at 138 South Kimball dated December 3, 2018. Exhibit number 5, liquor license application filed November 2, 2018.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is simply a request to transfer the location of said business from 134 North Center to 138 South Kimball, which, as I understand it, is conterminous with the commissary mall.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes, and again, no duplication of speakers will be allowed. At this time, I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the transfer of location of retail liquor license number 5 to please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in favor. Hi, Travis.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. So basically, you know, what I'm going to do is we're going to put a liquor store together, and then the plan is to, over time, take over and refurbish the entire building and property. Over time, it's a big project, but that's what the plan is. So, any questions?
Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, for being here tonight. I do have a question. So with this transfer, if this is passed tonight, are you planning on catering or anything like that, or what do you plan on doing with your retail liquor license?
Just a liquor store to start with, and eventually possibly catering, but just a liquor store.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Walsh.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Taylor, we've had quite a long time with this license being inactive and being transferred from place to place. In the memo that we have here, it indicates that you intend to be open no later than 20th of December. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I suspect with this date listed in here that this will be a condition of this allowance. Do you know?
John, do you know if there's a condition of it?
It's not a condition of the transfer. I think it's probably one of those things that he'll need to open his business or, again, make application to you for another continuance. But it would not be a condition for this transfer itself.
Okay, thank you.
Just
you bet.
But you intend to have it open by the 20th?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just so you know, I'll go ahead and vote to allow this transfer. We have been going through it for quite a bit, so if we don't make it by the 20th, I won't vote to renew your license.
Sure.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead, Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To tag on to Councilman Walsh's question, Council will recall that indeed you granted an extension that essentially terminates on the 20th. And so the concern is that the business be operational by the 20th. It's not a condition of the transfer, indeed, but there is an extension at play that does end on the 20th and makes it even more necessary that the business be operational at that point.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't mean to have you stand up here to go through the procedural stuff. You're welcome to. If the extension terminates on the 20th and we renew all the licenses in February, I guess how did our timing get off like that? So is it my understanding that after the 20th, if it's not open, then the license goes back to us?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the question at renewal time will be whether or not you want to renew that license if in fact it's not operational at the 20th. I would have to defer to additional statutory research that would indicate whether or not you have the ability at that point to grant another extension to wait for operations to occur. But the question you will then have is whether or not renewal is appropriate if in fact the business is not operational at the conclusion of this current extension.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, and then you can.
Mr. Henley, this is my understanding. He gets this granted to him tonight, and he gets it operational pursuant to the Wyoming statute. He's good to go, can operate until he renews the license in January or February or whenever we're doing it. Am I right about that?
I believe that's correct.
So the issue then in my mind is if we do it, he orders liquor from the Liquor Commission, has it put in the building, opens it in accordance with the state statute, he's good to go, right?
It's a little broad, but yeah, in theory, I think as long as he complies with the requirements that he has the business, that it's properly established, that he's bought his liquor from the appropriate people, that he opens his stores pursuant to statute and has an operational business,
Right.
then
That's
he
what I
is
said.
he's running.
What I thought I said.
And he's running, but you didn't say it in so many words.
I know, you did it in more words, but there is a statute concerning that issue, and just so the council knows, what it allows is you can open up, I did this for a client down in Cheyenne, actually, where they were having problems with the building getting done, they moved into one room, they bought the requisite number of dollars of liquor from the Liquor Commission, and they opened it up the requisite time, the minimum time that they could, which is allowable, and then they proceeded to finish the building and get it going. I'm assuming that's what you're going to do, isn't that true?
Yes.
But I think you're doing it with a client of mine over Wyoming Financial owns that building, don't they?
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to abstain from that vote because I don't want a conflict of interest there. But what he's doing is similar to what's been done elsewhere in the state.
And I would, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry. But just to finish up on that, certainly if you go through those requirements, then it's still up to the council at the time of the renewal as to whether or not the license will be renewed. So, I mean, I suspect there would have to be some good faith in there as well, that you just cannot have some type of a liquor building for show and not really operate it, because that's not the purpose of the license being granted. So that would be up to the council at that time.
Well, but the
So
statute says
I don't think,
exactly what he has to do.
I can't make a commitment like that, and I don't know that the council hasn't had the public hearing to determine that. So I don't think that we should be in a position where we have to let Mr. Taylor rely on something that maybe we can't let him rely on. So that's my concern.
Well, but if he opens, he orders the requisite $2,500 from the Liquor Commission, he opens it for the minimum period of time that they say he can do it, he can prove that, he's complied with the statute.
He's complied with statute and he can operate, but then the question is, does he get his license renewed? And it depends.
Well, that's a different matter. That's nothing we're facing tonight.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And not to have you stand up here so everybody can beat up on you or anything, but I think you do need to be aware that I don't think Councilman Walsh should be the only one voting against your license if you don't get something productive moving along with this. And
Sure.
Everybody is hopeful that you're able to have a great, wonderful, and successful business there and be a nice use of that building. And so I wish you well in that regard, but I do think that you need to get going on that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will also vote for this change, Mr. Taylor. But I think it's also good for people to understand the context of some of these concerns. Casper has received criticism over the years from other communities, from the legislature, for parking licenses and not having them in use. And so it's maybe not fair for you to have all of this pressure because of that context, but that's the way it is. And so as we told you last time when you asked for the extension, I think we pretty much made it clear as a council that this was it. Mm-hmm. And so I will echo those comments that it really has to get open.
Right.
And you know that.
Sure.
So, but thank you. And I also echo Councilman Huber's comments that we hope you are very successful in your business.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any other individuals who wish to speak in favor? At this time, I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the transfer of the location of retail liquor license number 5 to please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in opposition. There being no others to speak for or against the transfer of the location of retail liquor license number 5, I now declare the public hearing closed. Chair would entertain a motion to, by minute action, authorize the transfer of location of retail liquor license number 5.
So move. Second.
Moved by Councilman Johnson, seconded by Vice Mayor Powell. Discussion. Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions and then just a statement after that. The first question is for perhaps our city manager and then our city attorney. The first one being, this is a rather detailed memo that we do have in our packet, so I was curious if staff is taking one side or another on if we should transfer this license. And then I'll ask the question to the
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I appreciate the question. Indeed, we are not necessarily taking a position that it be issued or not as far as a transfer is concerned. However, we do want council to be aware of what it is that council has asked for in the past and what has taken place. And at this point, we are at this point because nothing has taken place in terms of making that license operational. And so I didn't want Councilman Walsh's question to go without the complete answer with regard to what is actually happening.
Thank you. Next, just so we're clear, transferring this by no way extends this for another year if we transfer it to Kimball. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Henley. And then the general comment that I'd like to make on this is we've been dealing with this for some time when this was originally transferred from Elixir LLC to Lucky 95 LLC in 2016, and legislation has saw it as such an issue that there's been park licenses that they've passed a state law saying it can't be, non-operational or parked longer than 3 years. They moved it down to 2 years with one extension, and we're fast approaching that. And if you talk to businesses around town and other catering services, they would love to have a retail liquor license. And I won't be here for the renewal process, but to have some sort of a storefront and half sell and half not, and to be operational by state statute on a weekly or ongoing basis, I mean, is that really doing that type of license a service to our community when other businesses could certainly expand and take advantage of that retail liquor license when there's so few of them in our community? So that's something for future council to consider, and I hope you realize that this has been parked for a number of years.
Councilman Johnson.
I just wanted to point out that in my opinion, our state liquor laws are ridiculous anyways, especially for full retail liquor licenses. It forces people to grovel at the foot of government, and government gets to pick the winners in those situations. So I just wanted to state that I think legislation needs to be drastically changed in regards to liquor licenses.
Councilman Laird.
I have a question for Mr. Henley. Mr. Henley, has Mr. Taylor complied with state laws up till now?
I believe that he has it. When he last renewed, I know that we were concerned about that, and we looked at it, and I actually did some research, and he had complied.
So he's totally complied with the law?
As far as I know, he has. I think it's, in answer to your question, as far as I know, he has.
And I'm one of these people that think you either have or you haven't. You're either pregnant or you're not. So if he's complied with the law, I don't even understand why there's a problem with anybody. If the man's complying with the law, that's the way it is for anybody, whether it's him or anybody else in the city. So I'm going to abstain from the vote because I won't have to take the vote that gives him the license in January or February. But the government makes the laws, and we follow the laws, and the people follow the laws just because they follow not in timing we may have. I don't know why it's a problem or why it's even sticking in somebody's throat, really. But I hope that applies to this council for everything we do, because a lot of people come in here and they are complying with the law, and we may not have liked it completely. Well, if we don't, change the law then.
Any other discussion? Councilman Huber.
Councilman Johnson, you might or might not be surprised, but I agree with every word you said about the liquor laws.
Good.
I think that those need to be completely overhauled. In my mind, if anybody can pass all the health and safety things, they should be able to open up a business if they want.
Anybody else? Any amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With Councilmember Hopkins voting nay and Councilmember Laird abstaining, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the ordinance for the panhandling ordinance. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by the council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance repealing and replacing Chapter 9.18 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to panhandling.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Huber, seconded by Councilman, was it Hopkins? Oh, Johnson. Council will now listen to public comment. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes, and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. Okay, discussion. Councilman Morgan.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question for our city attorney. I'm just curious to know if there's any other examples or cases that you may have heard that allow government to limit speech or free speech, for that matter.
Your Honor,
Yes.
Counsel, thank you, Councilman Morgan. I appreciate the question. In fact, there are a number of Supreme Court cases, certainly a lot more Circuit Court of Appeal cases where government has been permitted to limit free speech. Almost all of you will have heard you can't stand up and scream fire in a crowded theater, or obscenity is still prohibited. There are things of that nature which have long been around. Originally, the right of speech was dealing with signs, and it was kind of a property analysis that occurred back in the early 1900s, and then it evolved to where people who wanted to express themselves, whether by signage, commercial signage, or other type of signage, the Supreme Court started to phase in the thought process. This is a free speech issue. It shouldn't be a property issue. And really, since 1972, they have looked at that and looked at it and looked at it again. And it's a very hard concept to write one case or two cases or three cases and have that and then act as a really firm guideline for legislative bodies such as you are. But in looking at this, what they've come up with now and what they've done is whether it's a matter of protesting. You can protest in front of some buildings, but you can't put restrictions in certain cases. The case that comes to mind is one that was in 72, Chicago Board of Public Education versus Mosley, where they had prohibited someone from protesting on a daily basis in front of a school, complaining of racial injustice, but they made an exception that if someone wanted to picket because of a labor violation or go on strike, then those would be permitted. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's not constitutionally permissible, because it makes a difference on the subject matter. We want to have kind of a uniform. We don't have to want to look to the subject matter of the ordinance or the statute. And so that was ruled unconstitutional. And then from there, they started to look at time, place, and manner of the communication. And in cases where the time, place, and manner would infringe upon someone else's right. So if I have a billboard, I want to put it right in back of your house so you can't see the beautiful parkways that you had thought you were going to be able to view for a long period of time, and the city council has said, no, that's not zoned for that. That may be something where it's an appropriate way where the rights come into conflict, and you can actually put some reservations and restrictions upon speech. And you have then finer slices, such as the zoning rules and regulations with respect to stores that sell erotica, things of that nature. Certainly also in ordinances where people's mobility is being limited, people's have the right to have mobility and freedom. And we have circuit court cases that talk about regulations such as we have in this panhandling ordinance, which are permitted so long as they're reasonable as to time, place, and manner, and there are acceptable alternatives put in place by the council, which I would invite you, if you don't believe that we have those presently, to let me know, and we can make amendments to the ordinance. But right now, we considered all of those things and came up with our work product, but I do appreciate the question.
Again, just a quick follow-up, if I may. So this being the third reading for this ordinance, you still don't see any issue of having those restrictions on how we have it defined in this ordinance?
No, I feel pretty comfortable in looking at this, that you've really incorporated very minor type of restrictions, very limited to small pockets of the geography of the city, and that in all of those areas where the geography has been limited, around bus stops or around David Street Station, due to the parking that we have, someone who wants to make the solicitation of the same people they would solicit at the bus stop or David Street Station, they're still going to be able to catch them and make the solicitation, but they just can't linger there where they are actually engaging in the event or waiting for their bus. So it seems to me that all of the requirements that have been set forth by the courts are included within this particular ordinance.
Thank you.
Councilman Walsh.
Thank you, Mayor. This is one of those ordinances that I don't think people realize that we had in existence before, and if I'm not mistaken, the one we had before was much, much more restrictive than this. You know, not often used. This was designed by Mr. Henley to bring us in conformance with those Supreme Court laws that talk about free speech. Our last one was very, very restrictive. So this actually relaxes the old standards that we had by quite a bit.
Vice Mayor.
And I think, just to echo, I think, Mr. Henley's explanation, the intent of the restrictions, as I understand them, is not so much to restrict speech as it is to safeguard the rights of people who might have those rights infringed by the manner of the speech. And you essentially said that, but that to me is what this is about, is trying to balance those things, and I think you've done a good job with that.
Any other discussion? Councilman Laird.
Just have a couple questions for Mr. Henley. Does this ordinance just target people asking for money?
No, sir, it doesn't. It targets people, whether they're making solicitations for religion, politicians.
How does it affect a politician?
Same restrictions. So basically the same restrictions. A politician can't go and badger you at a bus stop. A politician can't be out in the middle of a street that we've designated or that you've designated as a high volume or high traffic street. So those type of things.
So why do we call it a panhandling ordinance? To me, that just kind of gives the whole thing a bad flavor.
You know, the ordinance that we are amending, basically repealing and replacing, was known as the aggressive solicitation, I think was the title of it. And it just seemed that panhandling was the moniker that a lot of these ordinances has, and that's why it was chosen.
Thank
you. Any other discussion? Amendments. Councilman Morgan.
Mayor, I do offer an amendment to the penalty section, and I handed this out in pre-meeting, so basically the last paragraph would read, any person convicted of violating this chapter may be fined not more than $5 for the first offense and not more than $750, jailed for not longer than 6 months, or both for a second or subsequent offenses.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Councilman Walsh.
You know, when it was years ago, I believe it was the 90s, when the aggressive solicitation clause was put into the ordinances. That was done based on public demand and outcry for the aggressive solicitation, aggressive panhandling that was going on. It wasn't prompted by anything other than a demand that something be put in place to handle that. So while the old one was too restrictive based on today's standards, remember that there was a need that was prompted by an issue that was troubling the citizens. And I think if we look at it, you always look at it through the lens, oftentimes you look at it through the lens of, you know, we're targeting people that are just down on their luck and don't have anything at all, and oftentimes that is the case. Oftentimes they're scam artists, and oftentimes they're making plenty of money, and then you think about not the person that's out there gaining the money or doing those things. Think about yourselves, or think about your family, or think about your friends who are intimidated in a parking structure, have somebody next to them in an ATM. They also have the right not to be aggravated at those times. So the request is to be a gentleman or be a lady when you're out there making these requests, and not impede on someone else's space. Pretty simple request, and I think we should leave the fine wide open for the judges to discern it and not put the minimum of $5. If I go out and run for re-election and start harassing people with pamphlets, I'm not the targeted audience that would be looked for on that $5 limit. So there are a lot of variables in that, and I think that the judges will take those into consideration when they go to sentence.
Councilman Huber.
We're discussing Councilman Morgan's motion to amend.
Yes.
To make it a $5 maximum on a first offense. I just really absolutely oppose that. For one thing, it completely ignores the fact that in many instances, it might be a person's first conviction, but they might have been doing it a lot in the past. But also, it ignores the fact that there is such a thing as a highly aggravated first offense. It might be their first conviction, it might be the first time they've been in trouble for it, but they might have just really done it up, done it up in spades, so to speak. And I think that that's something that the court should be allowed to consider. And if we don't have sufficient trust in our municipal court to impose a reasonable sort of a standard and reasonable punishments on this, then I think we have a bigger problem than just would be remedied by establishing a first offense maximum penalty like this. I just think this is a bad, putting those kind of things into legislation's a bad move.
Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. The idea behind it is you see other offenses that occur and people rack up unbelievable fines, like public intox, somebody owing more than $50,000, and we're never going to see that money come back. So if it's going to be that aggressive, I imagine there's going to be another law that will most likely apply in that situation that they're going to be charged for and then hopefully convicted by a judge. So, the idea is moving away from these crazy high punitive damages where people can't pay these fees that we mandate or that the judge hands down. So it's just moving away from that, whether it's aggressively panhandling or having a joint in your pocket or something like that. It's just ridiculous that we keep having so high fines and penalties on our most vulnerable population.
Councilman Laird.
I agree with what Jesse said. Councilman Huber, I don't know why you want to pass an ordinance that gives this kind of authority to the judge, and you can visualize this horrible fact scenario where you would have to give him a $750 fine and 6 months in jail. I'd like to know what that fact scenario would be. And you were a judge 35 years. Where would you ever, on a panhandling ordinance, on a guy who's wanting money, where do you envision this horrible scenario that they should be nailed for 6 months and $750? I mean, I'm just wondering what it is. I can't think of something that bad that we have to continue to hand traffic court judges these kind of authorities to pound on people. Because I can't see a scenario in a panhandling ordinance where somebody can be nasty enough asking for money for some reason that would require 6 months in jail and a $750 fine. I don't think it exists, and if it does, it's a different crime, like Jesse said, which we have other crimes that meet that kind of prerequisite, where they're trespassing, where they're assaulting and battering somebody, where they're breaching the peace. And some of those that specifically fit these exacerbated issues don't call for 6 months and $750. But the trend of this council right now is to go to these huge penalties, and this municipal court was never devised for this kind of action where there's 6 months in jail that's aimed at poor people. I just don't understand the thinking that goes here, because you're very good at coming up with a possible general scenario that's exacerbated, but I can't think of one. And I've represented a lot of people in criminal actions, but you probably can, because you've seen some.
Well, picture the quintessential little old lady walking around downtown, and some guy my size walking along behind her, repeatedly saying, "Hey lady, give me some money. Hey lady, give me some money. Hey lady, give me some money." I'm hungry, I want to feed my family, give me some money, give me some money, give me some money, give me some money, give me some money.
I'd give it to you. I'd give it to you.
Give him the money. You're not a little old lady.
Yeah, I know.
But, you know, I don't think that there are going to be, you know, one out of however many cases that would be, but if that kind of an aggravated circumstance comes along, I think the court should have that tool in their toolbox. As for Councilman Morgan's concern that we end up with situations where people have, you know, $50,000 fine for something, I don't know that we've had any of those kind of things. But I absolutely have always felt that, well, I'm just going to come right out and say it. There are past city councils that have pressured municipal court judges in this town to produce fine revenue. And, you know, you need to impose high fines on these people and pressure them and squeeze this fine revenue out of them so that the city can have that money in their general fund. I think that is absolutely abhorrent. It's one of the worst practices that ever. You can talk to any lawyer that's practiced law in this town for a long time. They'll tell you that formerly went on. You know, I want no part of anything like that. And if I had any feeling that anything like that was going on, I would be the first one to jump up and want to do something about that. And so,
but you're giving them the authority with $750 fine to do just that.
Well, the fact that you have the authority doesn't mean that you end up having to do it. But, you know, like I say, I think in the appropriate cases, but just as a general proposition talking about this, you know, over-fining people and piling up all these huge uncollectible fines, that's ridiculous. I'd be the first one sitting up here on this to say, yeah, we don't want to be doing that because it's silly, it's counterproductive, it teaches the wrong lessons. I could go on and on. But anyway, though, I appreciate being able to answer Councilman Laird's concerns.
Councilman Johnson.
Councilman Hubert.
I can say, working at the jail for the last 11 and a half years, I've very rarely ever seen anybody come to jail on a panhandle, even though at the more restrictive ordinance that we have, I don't recall anybody. Usually it's breach of peace or public intox or something like that. So I don't think that you're going to see a mass increase in arrests on this ordinance. Also, I've been able to see the end result of what our municipal court judge has imposed on people since she's taken over. And I can tell you she's not out to throw people in jail for long periods of time, and she's not out to squeeze the last dime out of anybody either. And I'm pretty pleased with what she's done, and I'm glad we went that route, thanks to you, Councilman Laird, for that. But I think that the new ordinance is sufficient. You know, when I look at creating law, I look at whether it violates someone's life, liberty, or property. And in this case, an aggressive solicitation is violating somebody else's liberty and their right to go out into public without being harassed for money. So I'll support it.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've wrestled with this because I do appreciate the intent of the amendment. To me, it's really a separation of powers issue, and I just believe that we have to hire and oversee the judges that operate our municipal court and trust them to do the right thing. And giving them latitude, I think, is our role rather than be prescriptive. I've always had a problem with mandatory sentencing set by legislative bodies because that's not our job. I think our job is to hire the right people to do the work of judging these cases and come up with appropriate sentences. And if that isn't being done, then it's our job to give the municipal judges better direction as to what we think the public needs. And to me, it goes hand in hand with what I said earlier about how these matters are handled out on the street. Because again, I hope that our officers will educate rather than arrest and cite people and give them an opportunity to correct their behavior before they face fines and court action. And so that we can, in a decent way, say, this is what the law says. You may or may not be aware of that, but now you are, and you need to make some corrections here. So I think we should trust our police department to do this properly, and I believe we should trust our judges to do it properly. So with some hesitation, I'm going to vote no.
I have another comment, if I may.
Okay.
Listening to you, Councilman Powell, I appreciate what you're saying, but it is our job. We're the legislative body. It's our job to set the sentencing guidelines, period. We don't leave them up to anybody else. That's our job. If you really believe in separation of powers, our job is to say, Judge, here's your sentencing guidelines. And what you're doing is you're saying, Judge, it's your job between 6 months in jail and a $750 fine to do what you want. And once that gets passed, I am on board with Mr. Huber, because 20 years ago there were councilmen telling these judges what they wanted done, and that's totally inappropriate. And it's totally inappropriate for judges to come in here and tell us what they want in the form of higher penalties as well, which has also occurred fairly recently on this council, and that got stopped. So we all have a job to do. The police have to go take our ordinance and enforce it, and they're good policemen, and they will do that. So everybody does their job, but I don't want to get away from handing our job over to somebody else, because I think that's unconstitutional. And Mr. Huber, there was a fellow that went in and out of the jail, and I think Sean knew who he was, who was in and out for public intoxication, and he racked up over $53,000 in fines by the city. Now, how does that happen? It's ridiculous. That's what that town in Missouri was doing. It's made all the publicity, the way they were treating its citizens. I wouldn't have thought that would have happened here either. Other things some judges have done here, there must not have been much oversight on this council, because there was an over-sentencing for years until it was stopped. So this council has to stand up and do their job. And if it's to give out 6-month authority and $750 authority for an ordinance called panhandling, which is really directed at poor people who have no money, you get to do that.
Anybody else? Okay, so as to proposed amendment by Councilman Morgan, please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With council members Morgan, Laird, and Humphrey voting aye, motion to amend fails.
Thank you. And now on to the third reading ordinance, the third reading on the panhandling ordinance. Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
Council members Morgan and Laird voting nay, motion passes.
Thank you. Council will now discuss the ordinance for the motor vehicle operator's license ordinance. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance repealing and replacing Section 10.12.010 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to possession of motor vehicle operator's license required.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Huber, seconded by Councilman Johnson. Council will now listen to public comment. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes, and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. Discussion. Any amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the ordinance for the vacation of portions of various streets and alleys. This item is up for public comment and will be discussed by the council. Please read the ordinance on the second reading by title only.
An ordinance approving the vacation of a portion of South Oak Street, South Elm Street, West 8th Street, West 9th Street, West 10th Street, 2 alleys located in Block 84, Casper Addition, an alley located in Block 92, Casper Addition, and a portion of an alley located in Block 93, Casper Addition.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Councilman Laird. Council will now listen to public comment. Any discussion? Any amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the resolution for the special events guide. Because this is not on the consent agenda, it will be open for discussion by council. Please read the resolution by title only.
A resolution authorizing the special event guide policy and application and fees for special events.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve the resolution just read.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Humphrey, seconded by Councilman Johnson. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We had the opportunity to go over a lot of the detail with regard to this guide in a previous work session, but I thought it might be helpful to remind the council what the overarching purpose and goal was in putting a guide of this nature together. First of all, we did want to streamline the amount of stops that a citizen would have to make when they are interested in conducting an event, whether it be big or small. Previously, we had a number of places that the citizen would have to go to in order to make the event occur. This mechanism allows for the citizen to come to one office, that being the city clerk's office, and get all the questions and details taken care of there, and we follow up thereafter. The second thing that I think is helpful with regard to this tool is in that it stratifies the requirements in such a way that an individual who wants to do a small block party, for example, and perhaps would like a street closed, do not have to follow and adhere to the vast amount of requirements, if you will, that an event attracting 5,000 people might have to deal with. And so I think that this tool is very effective in making it so that the requirements for a small event are much more simple compared to an event that again attracts a large number of people and perhaps on a variety of days. The third thing, though, that I think is real critical for this tool is that it allows for an understanding of what is required to be memorialized and no longer subject to change with regard to the change of administration or varying directions that the operational staff might enjoy. And so the memorialization of these policies and ideas and rules and everything else is codified, so to speak, and anybody walking in the door should have a better understanding of what's expected of them than maybe perhaps previously.
Thank you so much. Discussion. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate all the time and effort that staff has put into this, and especially all the effort that a lot of the vendors in town have put into it and the people that organize events. I'm just a little concerned with a couple areas. One of them we addressed this afternoon regarding multiple permits for ongoing events, which might be scheduled once a week for 3 months or whatever during the summer months. And that's been addressed with the changes that came about this afternoon. But there are a couple places where I think we still need to go back and just take a look at some of our definitions and how we do things. One of them is the impact event chart that we have included there. Those definitions that we have for low impact events and negligible impact events basically indicate that if you want to have a street closure for a party, regardless if it's a dead-end street or whether it's Beach Street, it moves it up to a higher event if you're going to close a street, even though it may not have any significant issues with that specifically. The other thing, when we go back and we look at in the application, there are some things that I think could be helped a little bit by a little work. And when we go back under street closures specifically, this is on page 102 of your packet, have all residents, this is a question that you're supposed to answer, have all residents affected by the street closure been notified? Well, if you try and close 2nd Street, for example, that's a lot of people to notify, and I'm not sure how you do that. Now, it may be okay if you do it on the 100 block of South Kimball. That may be relatively easy to do, but how do you meet the criteria? If you put a yes or no down there, either way, you're going to be wrong. You can't win. You've got the same kind of a question down a little bit further in the same area. Have you provided for emergency services? Well, if I'm going to do a block party, can I put down 911, and does that meet any requirements? That's what you're going to do, is call 911. So it makes it really hard for the small group to fill this out. What are you going to say is the question. To go down to another question, have you arranged for private security? Does that mean I have to contract with a private security agency or with an off-duty police officer? Or does it mean that, yeah, I'm responsible because I got my name on the application? And that's what it used to be. You put your name on the application, you were responsible. So what I'm suggesting is that while we do need this to happen, and we saw the necessity, not so much from the eclipse, but resulting from the eclipse, we decided that we need to do something a little stronger. So what I'm going to suggest tonight is we table this to a date certain and give us a couple more weeks to think about some of these things that tie together when you fill out an application. Because the average person that wants to do this for a small group, it's pretty intimidating to see where we're going with this. So I would just request that we, I would make a motion to table this to a date certain.
Is there a second? Second? Did you have a comment before we?
Now that Councilman Hopkins has spoken about that, I notice under that street closure section, it says street closure / parade permits, and it speaks about all those things. And I guess that would apply to a parade too. And so, you know, when the fair gets a parade permit for the fair parade, under this, would they have to notify everybody that might be affected by the parade route about that? I wonder if that isn't probably something that needs to be looked at and maybe cleaned up a little bit or something. I don't know how you answer that.
So I call for the question.
Yeah. So we have a second on the floor. Any discussion? Yeah, Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. Just really quick, we're just passing a resolution for a city manager to implement this program. And basically, if you read the resolution, all that is in the resolution is special event fees and late fees. And that's pretty much it. There is the event guide, but just like any other, you know, city function within this organization, it's up to the city manager to make the necessary changes. So I think we should try to move this process along, give him the feedback, and certainly kind of echo the concerns that Councilman Hopkins has put forth. But, you know, I really wouldn't want to just hinder that anymore. I just put it forward, and then he can make the necessary changes. It's not an ordinance, so nothing's going to, you know, be affected by implementing this and then making changes later.
Councilman Huber.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Manager, do you agree with what Councilman Morgan just said and the concerns that Councilman Hopkins raised and what I was talking about? Do you think you can just do some rulemaking or adjustments under this if we pass this now? Or?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber, I do agree with Councilman Morgan's review of the motion before you. And indeed, we want the policy to reflect your will. And as I was taking notes, I couldn't find anything that I disagreed with in terms of the spirit that we were trying to accomplish with regard to the writing of this policy and the language therein. So I think that is absolutely possible, Councilman.
Councilman Hopkins.
In mind, I would withdraw my motion to table it. I would just let staff handle it.
Okay.
Can you withdraw the second? Is that the way it works?
I don't know if I seconded it.
John, do you know how we would?
I second it, and I'll withdraw it too.
Draw it. Okay, good. Councilman Walsh.
So we can just move forward and vote on it and then discuss this at a later time with these clarifications, right?
Mr. Mayor, Council would like that, absolutely. We certainly can.
Or you can just fix it.
And not even vote on it, just take it off.
We'll vote on it tonight.
And then the staff will just take care of it.
Come back.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Mr. Mayor, Council, we can do whatever you'd like. Bring it back to kind of let you look at the draft or just move forward with your direction, which I think is, again, direction that I wouldn't have any problem with.
Okay.
So I call for the question and vote then.
Yep. Okay. All right, please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
And I would assume, Mr. City Manager, that we could at any time, when we want to, we could bring that back and have that discussion with you about the special events guide, correct?
Mr. Mayor, absolutely. And furthermore, I'd be happy to sit down with Councilman Hopkins if he's willing to and kind of work some language with them and provide you a copy of the finished draft for you to review at your leisure.
Great, thank you. Please read the consent resolutions by title only.
Item 11B1, a resolution authorizing a new lease agreement between the City of Casper and Union Telephone Company doing business as Union Wireless for an existing wireless communication tower located at the municipal golf course. Item 11B2, a resolution authorizing a contract for professional services with IMS Infrastructure Management Services for surveying and reporting services for the citywide pavement condition index survey project. Item 11B3, a resolution authorizing the release of local assessment district liens. And item 11B4, a resolution authorizing a lease agreement between the City of Casper and the Hogadon Basin Snow Sports School.
The chair would entertain a motion to adopt the consent resolutions just read.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Johnson, seconded by Councilman Morgan. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Please read the consent minute action titles.
Item 12A1, authorizing the purchase of the CrowdStrike Falcon Next Generation Antivirus Subscription Service. And item 12A2, authorizing the appointments of Terry Lane and James Belcher to the Amico Reuse Agreement Joint Powers Board.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve the consent minute action agenda items just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Johnson. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Thank you. At this time, we ask council members to bring forward any relevant concerns or items of interest. Councilman Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just note me for being absent next Tuesday for our meeting. I'll be representing the city in Cheyenne, advocating for the skilled nursing facility for the VA.
Thank you so much for doing that. Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just note that we just spent something like, I think, $76,000 on this IMG engineering thing. This, to me, fits right into what I keep talking about. Why do we keep paying all of these outside engineering outfits to do all this stuff? Why don't we just hire one or two more engineers to work for the city and have them there year-round to do some of this stuff? But,
Great, thank you. Councilman Hopkins.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Councilman Johnson.
I just wanted to tell Councilman Laird that that gentleman you spoke of earlier during the panhandling ordinance, all his fines were probably 95% public intoxication fines.
They were what?
95% of them were probably public intoxication fines.
I knew that.
But we did amend that ordinance back in, was it 2014 or 15, I believe, to have it mirror Laramie's public intoxication ordinance. But anyway, that's all I want to say.
Thanks. Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to apologize again for missing last week's meeting. I did watch it, and I appreciate the discussion that you had, and I also appreciate Councilman Walsh making the changes. You know, it's one thing putting it out there and having public input and things like that, but it's another thing actually making those changes. So that to me shows, obviously, he's spearheading the animal control ordinance due to the public safety concerns and not any other reason. And, you know, some of the discussion regarding, you know, whether or not you can have a dog in your front lawn, you know, it was concerning to me that we were entertaining an idea that we would actually control what occurs on other people's private property. So I'm glad we kind of left that as is, and I hope it stays that way. You know, if we're going to use that mindset, me holding a gun or even cleaning a gun, and that scares somebody from going across the street, are we going to just try to ban open carrying on your own property, or even carrying a weapon because somebody's afraid of it and the potential that might harm somebody? So, you know, we have freedom. It's beautiful in this country, and it can also be kind of scary at times. So that's something that we're working through, and I, again, appreciate that, since I won't have a vote in January when this goes to the first reading, but that's just the feedback that I wanted to provide. And again, thank you, Councilman Walsh, for making the changes and working with everyone to implement that. Outside of that, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Councilman Humphrey.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilman Laird.
Just two things. I would like to, I've said this before, and I hope the next council considers it, in their accuracy of our record keeping. I think when a resolution gets passed, it should reflect on the resolution who voted for it and who voted against it. I just think it'd be a cleaner operation. It's now just signed by the mayor and the vice mayor, and I think it should reflect how the council voted. Secondly, is there a rule that anybody knows of how you elect the mayor and the vice mayor? Is there a set of rules you have to follow? Because if there isn't, there needs to be.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Laird, the only rule that I'm aware of is with regard to the council naming a mayor annually. And historically, as I understand it and have certainly observed over the years, the sitting council effectively directs the conduct of that particular election annually. And so beyond that, I would probably want to defer to Attorney Henley to clarify further if necessary.
Mr. Henley, do you have any insight on that?
I don't have any insight right now, except I know that we have also the Robert Rules of Orders, which has a pretty significant section on voting. And my guess is that there is some law out there, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
So some of the elections I've been in and seen, people get nominated by somebody. I think you gotta get nominated rather than nominate yourself. And then the issue is if you run for mayor, that's what you're running for. You don't get vice mayor if you have the second most votes. If you want to be vice mayor, run for vice mayor. It just doesn't feel right for some reason to me. And I think there need to be rules, and I hope the new council looks at those rules, because I think that the mayor and the vice mayor job needs to have a fair election. And people who want to run, put their name in, somebody nominates them, at least they've got a vote coming there. And then what you run for is what you get. You just don't get the spectrum of everything else that might be out there. So if you've got two gentlemen running for mayor, let them get after the program. One of them wins, one of them loses. Somebody else, a couple other people were running for vice mayor. One of them wins, one of them loses. It's confusing, and I just because it's been done that way, I hate that term. It's just not a proper way to run an election. That's my statement.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I mean, no disrespect to any of the matters we discussed this evening. We had serious discussions of the panhandling ordinance. We discussed the liquor license statutes and ordinances. We created an additional license type this evening. All of these things were important. None of the things we did this evening even come close in importance to a little piece of paper that you all got inviting you to a meeting of the Conservation District. The backdrop for my comment is that for many years we have had a problem with flood irrigation on the North Platte River dragging selenium off the shale into our North Platte drainage, which has created a problem for us with the EPA, and our North Platte River has been listed as a selenium risk, and all of the tributaries have been listed as well. For years, the Conservation District has been helping those irrigators move from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation, which greatly lessens the amount of selenium that is dragged into those drainages. And the city of Casper has had hanging over its head for many years the possibility of having to treat selenium at its wastewater treatment plant. to the tune of many, many millions of dollars. The only way to avoid that was to gradually reduce the selenium content in those water samples taken out of our river. And many of us who have monitored this became pessimistic that that would ever happen, because once a river is listed, it's extremely difficult to get it delisted. But guess what? We did. And so there is a celebration happening this Thursday of that outcome. And what it means for us is that we still have some significant challenges with our wastewater treatment plant. We're almost certainly going to have to develop organic treatment, an organic treatment facility that will also cost money. But to have the selenium content go down to the point where we don't have to take selenium out of that water is a huge benefit for us, because we were looking at a major facility that it looks like we will no longer have to build. So this is a really good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have anything tonight. The next meeting of the City Council will be a special work session, which is going to be held at 5:30 Thursday, December 6th, this Thursday, in the Summit Room of the Casper Event Center, and a work session and special session for the purpose of calling an executive session to be held at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, December 11th, 2018, in the Council's meeting room. A notice of an executive session to take place at this date during this meeting was given. We have a matter to discuss regarding litigation and potential donation. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Walsh.
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Humphrey. Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Thank you.